applause for our filmmakers. It's weird to not be able to like look people in the face while I'm talking to you. So I wanted to start just by sort of where your project originated. If we could just go down the line and talk about sort of how you come up with the idea and how it became a movie. Briefly, I guess. Oh, and introduce yourself just so they know. I don't know if anybody caught the names.
I'm Carl Jacob. I made the movie with the Deer Hunters called Cold November. Cold November is a fictionalized retelling of personal experiences that I've had or experiences that family members of mine have had. It's the briefest description of it.
And how did it go from that original idea for a movie to actually, like, when did you start picking up steam and it actually became a thing?
I attempted to make it in 2007 when I wasn't ready. Been thinking about making it since I was a teenager. And then started writing it again there's this grant that the Jerome Foundation gives out to residents of Minnesota and New York City. And at the time I was a Minnesota resident, and I was in a class, wrote 10 pages, which was the minimum required for the grant submission, and then submitted it to the grant and won the grant. So I was like, oh, shit, now I got to write the rest of the script. And that's how it started. Awesome. That was in I got the grant in 2015. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm Christina Parrish. I'm the writer and star of Call Me Brother, the incest movie. This is the director.
Hi, I'm David Howe, the director of the incest movie.
The idea it was going to be a short film until David and I talked about it, and he decided, you were like, you should make it longer.
Yeah, it was like 45 pages already. I was like, just add some more pages.
Yeah. The idea stemmed from my own personal relationship with my brother. Not that we had sex, but sorry, this is morning. But we just were really close and dependent on each other. No sexual things.
You made that clear.
But yeah, I know. Yeah, and then explored the relationship that stems between a brother and sister who are so close in age and hitting puberty and stuff.
I feel like you should put a disclaimer on the bottom of your tag that says, yes, I have a brother, but no, it's not like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just for me, it was a lot of the story coming together because, Christina wrote it and we worked on it a lot before we started shooting. And I think it was just kind of exploring just kind of dysfunction in general in families and kind of how that can manifest in different ways. And I think most families to some degree are dysfunctional, but definitely there was a lot to draw on. Just, like me, my brother was the DP on this movie, so we kind of had a lot of worked through a lot of family stuff in regards to this film as well. And so I think it's just kind of just seeing that effect, what the effect of dysfunction can have on children, especially when they grow up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi. My name's Allie, and I directed the short film after her. It came about, I was interested in making a genre blending experimental film that's deconstructing the archetypal lost girl that we kind of enjoy in modern crime films and television. So yeah, and it was more narrative than I anticipated, and kind of was trying to break down expectations in the way that we exploit women in film.
I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking, which I guess you don't because you're here. When did the whole light play? Because there's so much of the cinematography is based on shadows and light and all that. When did that become an organic part of the thing?
Actually, I was also a cinematographer on it. We shot with Panavision glass, so we had amazing lenses, so we could do a lot with light. Yeah, I was shooting the film for a year before I shot principal, kind of writing it as I was filming it, literally with the images, and then it became very interesting, just informing itself and its own motifs.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I'm Guy Fiorita, and I directed Mole Man. And I was working on the first season of American Pickers, and we stopped by Ron's house, and I had never seen anything like it before and never saw anything like it since, and knew that, there was more there to that story. So stayed in touch with him for a few years, and then eventually started production on the documentary.
I'm curious because so much of it is the relationship with the mom.
Yeah.
How quickly did you key in on that being like that was going to be kind of like a through line for you?
Well, almost immediately. I met her early on, and she's just an incredible woman and incredible person, so sweet, gentle, also so caring and defensive of her son. So I knew that relationship was going to be extremely important right away.
That's awesome.
I'm Sarah Newens, and I directed Footprint, which is a purely observational look at how people engage with the World Trade Center Memorial. And I had in the back of my mind that I always wanted to make a film that was just observing, so no central characters, no interviews driving the story. And then about a year and a half ago, I was visiting the grounds. I hadn't ever seen the memorials since they were constructed in 2011, and the pools that are now in place in the footprint of the Twin Towers. And I was just immediately struck by what was going on. And so I was able to get permission to go back with the crew and just really, just truly just observe and cut it together.
I'm curious, how long did you spend shooting it? Because it feels like it's almost like real time. I mean, I know that it's obviously not, but it feels like 20 minutes. Like, you know what I mean? How much time did you spend at Ground Zero shooting?
We shot across 2 days. The idea from the beginning was just to kind of represent a day in the life of the memorial. But they would only let us film in 2 to 3 hour chunks because they didn't want us to be, really affecting people's experience of the space. So we had to kind of do on and off. But what I really wanted was to be there in 24-hour period, but I guess it's open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of were there for all those hours, and it was spread across 2 days.
You got a permit for it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You cannot have a camera or a tripod in New York if you don't have a permit, especially by the towers, former towers.
Such a filmmaker question. So there's a microphone over here. I'm not sure if there's one on the other side, but if any of you have any questions, just go to the microphone over there, and as soon as I look up, I'll ask you to ask the question. When I sat down to think about, what do all of these movies have in common, the only thing that I could come up with, because they're kind of so all over the map, which is great in my opinion, you all have a tone that's like a fingerprint. It's specific only to you and your movie. And I was wondering if I could get each of you to talk about how you got to that place. Like, how did you get to that tone? I know, in your case, it was that you're from Minnesota and it's so personal to you. But in the finished product of the film, how did you manage to get so much of yourself in there while telling the story about a young woman getting her period, killing her first deer?
Well, I think in my case, it was just a lot of planning and rehearsal. Ben, the cinematographer, and I made another film together called Polywogs, which was a lot more run and gun. Mm-hmm. And I think that style of filmmaking has always appealed to me. I've always been into, the dogma movement and sort of, using natural light and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is cinematically sort of a progression, sort of not necessarily out of that, but sort of trying to keep the energy of that while still making a film that's a little more slick and a lot more planned. I rehearsed with the actors, specifically Bijou, the lead, for 8 months in preparation for the movie.
Wow. How did you get that luxury? Like, how did you find that much time with someone?
Well, we had the community in Minnesota was extremely supportive of this movie throughout the entire state. So we had a rehearsal space in the cities that donated us their space. So we just, and Bijou's a kid, so whenever she wasn't in school, this was the most exciting thing in her life. So she was really excited to rehearse. So yeah, that, and then Ben and I took an entire week before we started shooting to go to every single location and plan out the shots pretty specifically without storyboarding. I wasn't really interested in storyboarding. I was more interested in like feeling out the space together and then just making decisions and taking photos. And so we kind of photo boarded everything, but also like there's some pretty technically challenging shots, like specifically after she kills the deer and all of that stuff. So we had to be really, really specific about what we were going to do because we were working against the forces of nature in order to pull that shot off correctly. So yeah, does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay, cool.
Definitely for on my side of writing, and I just sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The colors in it were very purposeful, like what everybody's wearing in the movie, what the places, like especially the house, like that was my grandmother's house, how like interesting and bright colors, using like a contrast between like bright, fun colors with this like taboo subject of like a brother and sister falling in love was kind of like my purpose, like for capturing tone. Definitely is a different, like for you directing and shooting, and like the color grade, the music that we chose.
Yeah, it was, I think, kind of a lot of, well, you write with such a very specific style. Like, I've always loved your writing style, and it's always, whenever I read the script, it felt very much like it was in its own kind of world, in a way. And so, so when we were kind of trying to put the look of it together and the feel, it was like, I wanted it to feel like a little bit out of time and a little anachronistic. So it's like, I feel like a lot of the costumes kind of look like they're from the 90s, and then there's a lot of music from the 60s and 70s in the movie. But
and
then
there's iPhones.
Yeah, everybody has like iPads and Facebook and Grand Theft Auto and shit. So it's like, so it's kind of all over the place. But I think it was important to kind of make it almost like a fantasy world for these two characters to kind of inhabit, and I think kind of taking that break a little bit from reality, just a smidge, I think, kind of makes like the pill a little easier to swallow in a way, and it kind of hopefully makes you kind of support the relationship between these two characters.
Yeah, and purposeful in like writing all the other characters in the movie to be more aggressively sexual and cruel.
And kind of nasty people.
Nasty people. And the only pure thing really is the brother and sister's relationship. That was very intentional.
I'm having spent a little bit of time with you guys, you're all really funny. Was there a lot of improv on set? Did you find jokes on set that weren't in the script necessarily?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think there was some improvising.
Yeah, there's some. Andrew, so there's three guys. Andrew, who's my co-star, plays Tony, and his two friends, Brian, who is Nick, and Enzo.
Yeah, plays
Ched. They're all three like really good friends. So there's a point in the movie when they're like play fighting, and you can kind of see them break.
Yeah, we just had to keep it in.
Yeah. Oh, should I have not said that?
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine. Now y'all know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some of that, but honestly, the script, like I said, the script is made in such like a very specific, or written in such a specific voice, that it was, like kind of just on the day, we just kind of stuck to the script, and then we would just be cracking up just reading the lines. So it was like, kind of didn't feel the need to kind of bloat it out too much.
That was going to be my follow-up, is that if you did have people improvising lines, like especially for this, you run the risk of losing that thing that made the thing good. And
yeah.
How do you know when you've drifted too far off of that? Or do you know and it's just kind of like, oh, well, we'll have to fix that in the edit?
Yeah, I think it's that.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know, when it comes to, my life is kind of chaotic just in general, but like when it comes to, yeah, hope you guys are okay with my therapy session here. But when it comes to making
do you need to
movies,
lay down?
I'm sorry?
There's a couch you can lay down if you need to.
Actually, that'd be really tight. But I think when it comes to making movies, I'm kind of not that way. Like I started off as an editor, and I've got very much like an editor's sensibility when it comes to directing. And so there's a lot of like pre-planning the shots and going according to the script, and like like I love storyboards, you know. Like I don't do them for every scene, but it's just helpful in showing people what you're trying to get done. So it's like, for me, I think it's just easier, and it's nice to have like a checklist of just like every single thing you want to do on the day, and then getting that done is like super cathartic. And I never make lists in my real life, so it's just like, I'm like, yeah, lists. So it's really helpful, I think, to just kind of go by the script. And I think if the script is already so good, there's not much point.
And it was so good.
Yeah.
It's like you didn't even need a director, right?
Right. Yeah. It just did itself.
We should make it a play.
All right. Well, for my film and for all my films, since I hold my own camera and I'm really inspired by like an Italian neorealism in the streets camera, I'm really elevated by my actors. So like on the day, I always try to really find amazing collaborators, because my directing is very much informed by how are they interpreting the scene and how is my camera interpreting the scene in tandem with them. And because of that, I feel like I do have a very like naturalistic, weighted tone to my films, and they're often very quiet. They're not really governed by dialogue, and I try not to end a scene with like a destination. And because of the way this one was shot, which had a lot of experimental flowing in and out of it, I felt like there was a lot of opportunity to let like my taste really show in the handheld in the actual movie. And like at the end of the day, I really just wanted it to be a parable. So if I imbue too much dialogue or like a thesis, then I wouldn't really get what I wanted to, which was really at the end of the day just a ride that you can receive or not receive what my intentions from it.
It seems like that is there's like maybe more trust or something like that with everyone that's working on the movie. Like you have to really trust that the thing is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to my cast and my producers, who kind of let me be free. And I have a really great gaffer who I work with commercially as well. And basically, he just kind of leaves me be also. And so I'll just go and film a scene. Half this movie was 3 people in the woods, and then the other and then another 30% was 2 people in my parents' basement, and then another 20% was us with Natalia Dyer on a cliff with a bunch of people, because she can't fall off that cliff. So like it was like that, and it was great. And I wouldn't change any of those elements. They all inform each other. The realness of having like someone with that kind of responsibility attached to her made it so that even on those days where we were being flowing, it was always with a very intentful camera. It was never like, oh, we're just gonna find it. It wasn't that. That's not what I mean to say. It was just like, I think my camera work informs my directing, and then my directing wouldn't. That's why I don't really, right now, haven't found that perfect cinematographer relationship, because the stories I want to tell are so linked to the images that I'm seeing in front of my lens.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, my story wasn't my story exactly.
Yeah.
So it was, it's a balancing act of making the film, or making the audience see what you're seeing, as well as doing justice to the story that's actually happening. This family invited me into their lives and let me show a lot of things that normally families would keep hidden behind closed doors. So I think for me, it's like just having the patience to wait for that story to come out in the best way possible, because you can step on the gas and force people, not necessarily like actually force them, but with the power of suggestion, get things out of them that you wouldn't normally get. But that's never the best way, and it doesn't come across as authentic a lot of times. So just having the patience for me to let the story reveal itself is I think was the most important part, and to tell it with humor, because obviously a lot of the things in my film could be just a total bummer, right? So if you can't laugh throughout the story, it's going to be kind of a painful watch, and I'm not a total bummer of a person, at least I think I'm not. So yeah, that's about it.
Speaking of the power of suggestion, Mole Man is playing today.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, at 1:15.
Yeah. If you're interested by what you saw.
So that's a suggestion.
You're
I'm
already
not forcing you to go see it.
You're already here, is what
Yeah.
I was going to say. So you
Exactly.
might as well make the
if
most
you
of it.
want to.
Wait, what's my question again?
The tone.
Oh.
It's like playing telephone. By the time you get to you,
It
you're
is
like,
kind of.
the questions change. You kind of hinted at it a little bit before about how you were had some production limitations. But how did you know that like the verite style was the right way to show that experience at Ground Zero, or was it just a
Well, I think I essentially set out to recreate my own experience of the space and just put together like an experiential film as best I could. And I mean, I knew it was an experiment because I've made other films, other documentaries that are, character-based and interview-driven, and it's a very different approach. You have to plan, you have to do a lot of pre-production. This was very much like, all right, let's just go and see what we get. But I had visited the space prior to going with the crew, and, I knew that I was immediately struck by all the selfies and family portraits and selfie sticks, and there was just certain things that really jumped out to me, so I knew I wanted to get those. But I think a lot of my film came together in the edit room, because I'm an editor by trade, but I'm used to having more of a sense plotted out before. So it was a lot of trial and error of okay, I have all these cool moments, but how do I create an arc aside from just, okay, it started in the morning and ended at night. I wanted there to be an emotional journey too. And the best way I could handle that and approach that was just by starting where I started with the selfie sticks and then, I hopefully was able to communicate that there's a non-judgment. I think I started in a place of a little bit of judgment of that, and then after sitting with it and hearing all these interesting things going on and hearing parents explain this event to their children, and then I started to, that really dissipated, and then I just was left thinking wow, this is a crazy thing, that it's a global experience, that there's no one way to commemorate that kind of tragedy, or right way.
Does anybody in the audience have a question? I'm sure you do. Gotta go over to the thing. I told you that before. What are you doing, man? Come on. No, just kidding. Sarah? When did you fall upon that the guides would sort of be one of the ways that you passed time in the short?
I mean, essentially that was also the only thing that I could sort of prearrange, and I knew that they would be conveying a lot of interesting information about the space itself, because I wanted it to live more in the actual memorial, not in people's experiences of the day, But also, I learned that they had all been residents and had volunteered to give tours because it's therapy for them, and I really liked knowing that, I don't know, maybe the film could kind of represent a similar therapeutic experience if possible.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make fun of you.
No problem.
I was just going for a laugh. I apologize. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Gustavo, and I have a question for Christina. First of all, I loved your film. I love how the arc of how the two characters, it starts out innocently enough, and then the sexual tension builds throughout the film, and then you have this ultimate climax at the end. Did you always have that arc in mind, or did you consider showing us, what if they hooked up earlier in the film, and what happens after that?
No, my whole thinking on that was that I wanted it to build on it, so that at the end you finally get that release.
The amount of times climax and release have been said.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah, it's the movie is one big tease, and so I want it was always that they make out at the end through all the edits, not that they had sex at the beginning, because I wanted to build that story, so you want it.
Thank you for your question. I think one of the other things that, as I've been sitting up here, I've been hearing you guys all say, is that there's a certain amount of vulnerability required to do the movies on the level that we're doing them, and the kinds of movies that you guys are doing. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to sort of put yourself out there in that way and when you see it with an audience, what's that? How does that pay itself off, or does it, and you're still waiting for that to happen?
So wait, what's the first part of the question?
Especially like in your movie, right? Like there's a certain amount of vulnerability about sharing this experience of like getting your first buck and that kind of thing.
Having my first period.
Well, that too, yeah. Things have gone really. We've gotten into some taboo stuff up here already. But no, there's a certain amount of vulnerability of telling the story of like coming of age kind of a thing. What's it like to put that out there? What's it like to sort of write that on the page and then see an audience react to that?
It's cathartic. It's good. It's fun. It's I mean, I'm probably the worst person to ask this question to in terms of my adherence to social norms, because I've always been really interested in making my business known to everyone. So to me, it just fits in with my lifestyle perfectly. So yeah, I like and there are certain themes there's certain things that happen in the film that are also therapeutic for me. There's for those of you who've seen it, I don't know how many people have seen it, but there's the ghost of the dead cousin. That's taken from a real life experience that is something. This is the first time I think I've really communicated with my family sort of my feelings on what had happened to her, and so it's I think it's good to move on. Yeah, it's cathartic, therapeutic. That's how it feels.
Cool.
For me, I've been doing comedy for quite a while, and I'm literally going insane. I've been doing comedy for a while, and I don't know. It's like I do stand up, so it's like I put myself out there all day, talk about all kinds of stuff that I'm not gonna say, but I don't know. It's fun to take all of your tragic trauma or weird experiences and throw them out to other people who didn't ask for it. And making this movie was very therapeutic in that way. There's like pictures of my actual dad in this film, which he's not into. But I don't know. It's fun to be vulnerable, and it's scary, but it's awesome.
Yeah, I know. Just like we just had a really good group of people that all just were super into it from the beginning, and so that made it all so much easier. There's actually a few times where you just kind of during the process where you just kind of forget a little bit that the topic is taboo that you're working with at all, and then. And then you kind of remember sometimes when people are like, you like describe the movie and they're like, oh, okay. and then you kind of like have to take a step back and you're like, oh shit, like we're really, because this is like our first feature, and we'd never really done anything like this before, so it was like a vulnerable place, I think, to jump into something like that right off the bat, but honestly, yeah, you just don't know how it's going to go until people see it, and you get reactions and stuff like that. And I don't think anybody's been really offended by it or anything. And I think that's been very validating. And yeah, just having a big, good group of people that were all totally believing in it really made that a lot easier.
And if you are offended by it, I would love for you to tell me why.
Your thing, it's so much you. Like there's not a lot of place to hide, Like yeah.
For me.
Yeah. Alec.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah.
I'm like, if I wasn't making it for myself, who would I be making it for? And like that's what I remind myself when sometimes it's a little bit off center. And I mean, and I feel like when I'm actually as a cinematographer, it gives you a thicker skin because you're kind of always negotiating are you doing the shot for yourself? Are you doing the shot for someone else? Which one did you go too far left or right on? And you kind of always like hate yourself a little bit. So I'm just kind of used to always kind of hating myself. So I'm just going to keep on making my movies and we'll see how that shakes out. Like my first movie was much more linear, kind of like 3-act structure, whatever, felt nice at the end. And I was like, this is cool. It's big. It works. Not really interested in it as a long-term calling card. I'm really more interested in making stories as parable. And like I said, that's why it's like, if you can take it any way you want, I feel like I'm actually writing this as more of an experimental film than it may or may not be perceived as for people, which is great because I would love to be making these more classically watched films that are actually operating in parable, which is very similar to like how Guillermo del Toro did his acceptance speech. He's a huge influence of mine, as is Tarkovsky, and seeing them create films that are working in multiple ways that you want to watch again, that you might not like, then you might like, then you hate again, then you think they're cheaper, and then sometimes you watch your own film and you're just like, I was like putting a lot on that moment that like maybe I over-inscribed, or maybe I didn't mean anything by that, like rebirth that people are interpreting, so that's cool, and you just like don't tell everyone what it means. Like that's all I'm learning. It's like let people take it. It's a parable.
Awesome. Awesome.
And you have to, yeah, I mean, it's like 1s or 5s. Saw some papers on the ground. It's a 1 or a 5 in those, as far as the audience goes.
Love it or hate it, right? Like take that, yeah. Awesome. That's awesome.
Putting yourself out there for me is like incredibly gut-wrenching, awful. Like the first time I ever watch anything I did with an audience, I want to vomit for at least the first 20 minutes of it.
You've gotten over it? I still feel like I'm gonna vomit.
Yeah, still. But I think, it's like you were saying, it's just like you go through hating yourself and then you like yourself again. But, you just have to enjoy the process. A crazy artist friend of mine told me one time, he's like, I'm like driving down a road in the truck and my paintings just kind of fall off the side, but I just keep driving that truck. He's like, it's not about the paintings, it's about the process. So if you don't love the process, do something else. And that was like just a fleeting moment in time. He probably does not remember saying it, but that has stuck with me for years and years and years. So I like doing this. I don't like showing it to people. I don't like putting myself out there. It's part of it,
Just finish the movies and they're on your hard drive for the rest. Yeah,
and I think for a long time I didn't do things because I got so hung up on the finished product. I was like so all about how this was received or how this short was received or what people thought about this. And once I kind of was like, you know what, just do it, put it out there, you'll learn from it, and do the next one better if it didn't do well. So that's what I try to tell myself now. I'm not successful in doing that. I still do hang a lot on the finished product, but I think just knowing that in the back of my head helps a little bit. But yeah, it's painful. It is painful.
You actually already answered the question last time, so if you want, we can just ask the person what they want to ask.
Sure. I actually haven't seen my film with an audience yet, so I can't.
Oh.
I'm very much looking forward to that. I'll just plug
When is it
real quick.
playing?
Tomorrow at noon. It's
There you
playing.
go.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Eric. Thank you guys for all being here. We appreciate it. I have a question that's geared towards everybody. Is there a certain hardship or disaster that happened in the process of making your film, whether it be getting funding or dealing with a certain cast or crew member or somebody ruining your shot, and how did you overcome it?
Isn't making a film just perpetual disaster management? The answer is, which one do you want to know about, I think.
Is there a certain one that stands out to you that you like?
Oh, man. Oh, I've got a good one. Shooting in Minnesota in November is very challenging because of the weather. And when you have actors' schedules that you have to work with, you can't shoot in sequence usually. So we shot a bunch of stuff with one actress who then had to leave because she had a play she was in. And then we had to shoot the stuff that was in between her stuff, and most of it's all in the woods. And when we got to the day where we were going to shoot like the last 2 things that we needed for this one sequence, where it was all kind of sunshiny out and crunchy leaves on the ground, we got 3 feet of snow. And it was supposed to be all outside in the woods. So I was having a nervous breakdown, and my DP was like, just go in the car and just, look at the script. I'll be back in a little bit. And he set up a shot, and he goes, come here, check this out. And it ended up being one of our favorite shots in the whole movie, which was this wide shot that is just all sky and woods, and the ground is completely framed out. And the actors are just walking on the bottom of the frame, so we don't see anything that's on the ground. And it was this happy accident, but, this disaster management that turned into this, beautiful thing. So that was one of several things that happened, I think.
Give that DP a hug.
Yeah.
So if you've seen the film or whatever, peaches are a huge thing in the film. They represent a vagina. Anyway, so we were shooting. My producer's covering his eyes.
But he's also still recording.
Yeah,
He hasn't turned it off
that's a
yet.
good sign. We were shooting peaches. It's like in all these scenes with the dad, and damn, there were like no peaches where we were shooting.
Yeah,
like
they were out of season in Crockett.
Yeah, so my grandmother, because this was at her house in Crockett, she got persimmons and boiled them and peeled them.
Yeah, it was her and our art director Nathaniel. Yeah, they skinned them and peeled them, and then
Injected.
Yeah, they put like red food dye and like injected them in there. So there's actually no peaches in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, there's at the very beginning in the bathroom.
There's one.
We shot that in Austin.
One actual peach, but all the other ones are persimmons.
Yeah. So that was tough. We really before we got here, we were like, we're gonna tell this peaches story.
Yeah, that's all we wanted to tell. True hardship.
You were right though when you were talking about just like, because there were a few, because we shot really fast and like we shot over 14. It was 14-day shoot, and every day was like 12, 13, 14-hour days, and so there was like, and we're a small crew and we're paying everybody what we can, and so there's definitely like everybody kind of had a day that kind of broke them. You know what I mean? Like like you're talking about just going into the car and like freaking out. Like I definitely had a couple of those, and everybody had it. It was always kind of like a game of like who's gonna break today.
It really was, yeah.
But it was fun, and then you have a little pep talk, and then everybody hugs and you say you love each other, and then you just kind of try to forget about it and just move on. But it's tough, But I think those are like the main hardships. It's just like keeping everybody sane, like finishing shooting at like 3 a.m. and getting up at 5 to shoot something. So it makes it difficult, but whenever it's all done and you're at the wrap party and everybody's drunk, nobody cares.
Yeah.
I feel like this is kind of a hard question to answer because so many of us, filmmaking is so inherently problem solving that I wouldn't necessarily, maybe every single day you have like 10 problems, but you're not gonna let them define your day. And you're also, maybe they made your day better. Maybe they like tied your hands behind your back and you just came up with a beautiful shot because of it. Yeah. And like, I actually think like filmmaking is kind of its own constrictions all culminating together. And that's like what makes all of our projects unique is like how we're all tackling our script, which is its own problem, and tackling our issues with lighting a space or blocking out our actors. So it's like a catch-22 question because like at any given time you could just have a panic attack. There's just so much to do. And then like the very first day where you sit at your computer, you're just like, what's next? Like I have a whole hard drive of stuff and like now I have to just start to go through it and I have to make this first pass and I have to make the next pass and is it even working? And so I just feel like the best thing I can do is just like go for a run and then come back and like do it again and just like try not to let myself get too defined by problems because there's so many of them and just stressors.
Yeah. What she said. I guess I turned in. I was lucky enough to get financing for my doc and turned in the first cut, and they loved it. They were like, "This is amazing." I got. They brought in an editor, really good editor, high accolades. We worked together for a couple months, turned that cut in, and they were not interested anymore. So it took me, then I had to go back because I had done the first cut. They're like, the magic's gone. But, it was like we were in the middle of the process, right? We were pulling something apart, trying things out, trying to put it back together, but it just wasn't seen that way. It was seen as like, maybe this isn't working.
Going in the wrong direction.
Going in the wrong direction.
Instead of it being a part of the process.
So then it was like silence from them until I was working with my producer, and we, I got back together like the first 20 minutes of the film in a new way, in a better way, and suddenly they were interested again. So that was like a 3-4 month process where I was like, this film is never going to get finished.
So hard to know which cut to show people because
Yeah.
when you're in it too, you're just you have no idea.
Totally. So it eventually, that crisis turned out better because I looked at the film a whole new way, and it was reorganized and restructured, and I think a better film because of it. But you can be the judge at 1:15 today.
This film was a very unique experience because I never shot with this approach before, and basically, like, my DP was the eyes and I was the ears, so I was doing audio, but he was using very long lenses from very far away, so we couldn't talk to each other until I decided to get like those like Secret Service earpieces, which made it very cool. But we were trying to catch life caught unawares kind of thing. So it definitely made for an interesting experience where I couldn't ever really look through the lens and see the shots. I really had to trust him. And he couldn't hear what was going on, so he'd have to sort of follow where I was pointing the mic. I did get a gigantic shotgun mic with this huge left bin that was about this big, so he could see it from far away. But there was also crowds. I mean, there's thousands of people visit the memorial a day, so I think a lot of the stuff was honestly just luck. I mean, I synced it together in the edit room and kind of didn't even know what we got. And there were moments when they finally came together and I realized we had in-sync audio with the visuals. I would jump out of my chair. I mean, it felt like, like kind of a miracle that we got those moments. So
I have another filmmaker question for you.
Oh.
Did you get releases from everybody? Were they area released, or does it not matter because it was a public space?
all of the above. I had pre-arranged tour guides and people on tours and gotten all of their releases signed. I had PAs with me who were approaching people, and then also I'm sure there's people there was just no way to get everybody.
No lawsuits yet, though.
But no, and
It also hasn't screened yet, so that,
Right.
No, but it was a public space, so there shouldn't be any issues. And I did talk to a lawyer who agreed with me.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I thought. That would be your ace in the hole, is that it was
Yeah.
a public space.
Exactly.
So get a lawyer is part of the advice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay. First of all, the process versus product distinction is one I struggle with too, and I appreciate that. I just have two quick questions. First, broadly, for all of you, what drew you into filmmaking to begin with? What made you fall in love with film, movies, and kind of inspired you to actually try to make one? And second, what's your most optimistic yet realistic scenario for having as many people see your film as possible?
Wow. That was 3 questions, right?
I have a notepad. Do you need to take notes?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'm just trying to remember all 3. So one was what inspired us to make movies? I remember loving the Mickey Mouse Club. I think that inspired, because I'm an actor. I act pretty regularly for a living. And so that's, I think, what initially got me interested. Watching Wizard of Oz was a huge inspiration to me. I remember loving that movie. But I think the moment at which I decided, you know what, I think I want to do this, was when I saw Pi in the theater. That changed my life. I was like, wow, this is so unusual. Because I didn't really have a film education. I was pretty sheltered. I grew up in the woods, so when I moved to Minneapolis when I was 18, I started going to art house cinema, and I was like, oh my God, this is a world I'd never known about. So yeah. And what were the other questions? It was an audience versus, you should go back to the mic, tall man. What were the other questions?
how do you get it in front of as many people as possible, realistically?
Make a video game. Yeah.
YouTube is I think the other answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's a challenge. I mean, this movie has a built-in audience. A, because we shot it in Minnesota and we did a lot of PR when we were shooting it. We did a Kickstarter campaign while we were shooting the movie, which I don't recommend anybody does because they're 2 full-time jobs happening at the same time. But I ended up hiring someone to just manage the Kickstarter. So we actually, I've been working with Visit Films and Monument Releasing, who got interested in the movie after went through the IFP lab. And when they signed on to, work with us and buy the movie, they said, we want to put it in theaters. And I was like, you're crazy. What do you mean you want to put it in theaters? Nobody goes to theaters anymore to see films of this size. And they go, well, we think we can do like targeted marketing within certain regions and just do, basically areas that wouldn't get a film festival, and bring the film, basically do a mini festival-like kind of week-run screening of just this movie. And we did that in Minnesota. We did it in 4 cities. And we outsold, in Hibbing, Minnesota, which is where we shot the movie, we outgrossed Black Panther and Pacific Rim Uprising threefold on the opening weekend that we had it there. So, it's just it's a lot of work, though. So thankfully, I have a team of like 9 people who are basically working on trying to get this movie out there full time until it goes to VOD in May. So, but this has been something that we've been, designing for about 7 months, and it's been completely exhausting. It's been a full-time job, even though there's all these people working on it trying to do that. So, yeah, I guess having a movie with a built-in audience is always a good thing. I try to, yeah. So and going to film festivals is great because we get to have, conversations like this around it. Yeah. I think as a filmmaker, showing up at screenings, even if you're doing one-off screenings that are not festival related, or even if you're doing releases, is a huge draw. Whenever I was speaking after the movie, that was always our biggest selling nights. So I took my 20-month-old child with me and went on the road on a speaking tour for 12 days in Minnesota. So I was getting about 4 hours of sleep a night. Yeah, that just happened.
My inspiration is I love Roseanne, and Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I'm just kidding. Sorry. I'm awful. I'm a big fan of Todd Solondz's movies, and Happiness is, I mentioned this last night. Happiness is a great film, so mind-bending in a way. I don't know what drew me to filmmaking, right? That's the question. It's just nice. It's, it's awful, but it's really nice. Yeah, I don't know. You just want to make cool shit with your friends, and it's fun. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I do it. I just am doing it. It's very weird. And the other one, I don't know how we're gonna get people to see this movie.
Yeah, we're trying to figure that out. So if anyone works at Netflix or something.
Yeah. We had a couple ideas at breakfast, though. We had some ideas to get it in front of people.
Yeah, true. That's true. I think I don't know that we have a built-in audience like you do, but I think it's like.
Well, the Austin comedy community is.
What about NAMBLA?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of Austin comics in the movie, and a lot of improvisers and comedians. So it's people in Austin are actually kind of dying to see it. We haven't really put it out there yet. This is the first time we've screened it, so. But yeah, I think it's we're trying to figure that out still. I agree. It's your gut is when you're talking about distribution is not like nowadays, it's not like let's put it in all these theaters necessarily. You really just want to get it to the place where it's easily most accessible to the most number of people at any time.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, that'd be cool to go see my movie with like a movie pass or something.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
You know, that'd be sweet. But yeah, I don't know. If you guys have any leads, let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just got into filmmaking because I like movies.
And this was your world premiere, right?
Yeah, it was.
So you're just beginning.
Yeah, we've only just begun.
Yes.
Hopefully.
I just really enjoy the loss of self in cinema, and I enjoy the act of making it and the loss of self I have while making it. So it felt like a very natural kind of outlet for me, and both in the final product and in the process. So I just enjoy every aspect of it. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to make my movies because I have no money. So, you know, that's great. So, but I mean, as far as my final, you know, destinations, this is really intended to become a feature film. So, and I'm really trying to establish my taste and my preference in my short so that I'm not getting into bed with the wrong producer who's expecting a certain type of science fiction film that I'm not able to deliver. So I am trying to preempt what people may expect of me as a filmmaker. And at the end of the day, yeah, I would love for this to go online and just have some sort of appreciation, but it's really for the feature, and like that's what I ultimately hope of it.
Allie, can you qualify loss of self?
What is that? That's 3/4 back in the cinema, diegetic experiences, sometimes breaking the fourth wall. No, I don't know. Not 4D, not 4D, not 4D. That's not loss of self. Just because the chair's rattled doesn't mean it's, you know. Yeah, no, I don't know.
I'm lost.
Becoming anyone. You can become
There's a lot of
anyone
film
in
theory
film.
jokes going on right now is what's happening.
There's
There's a couple of PhDs that are laughing in the audience. But so what were your influences and
John Hughes movies mostly. I was an only child, so that's kind of where I lived. Those are my friends. That's sad. Not totally true. But I did, you know, I enjoyed comedies when I was a kid, and then I worked, didn't work with, but hung out with a bunch of people that also liked that, and we started writing stuff, and I was the person that worked at the production company that could take their camera on the weekends, legally, and then had access to an edit system, so I just did all that stuff after work and on the weekends, and that's how I kind of ended up in the filmmaker position and not the writer or actor position. And got better at it. Made some horrible mistakes. So but really enjoyed it. You know, had no idea that I also, like Carl, I grew up in South Dakota, so I knew zero people that ever worked in television or film when I was a kid. I thought it was just some like magical, mystical thing that happened in a far off land. But once I realized that people like me, just like me, could have a career in television, I was like, all right, let's do this. And as far as distribution for the film, which I think is, you know, the goal ultimately, is for as many people to see this as possible. I would, if someone just put it on a streaming service that everyone could see, I would be happy. There are also producers involved in the film that you know, they have a financial stake in the film, so they are working out a distribution deal right now. I can't say anything about it yet, but I think it's going to happen. Hopefully, fingers crossed, and then you'll be able to see the film globally. And it's for the character of the film. I'm hopeful that that's something that is beneficial to him. And beneficial to people in his situation, ultimately. So for me, I don't care how it happens. I just want as many people to see it as possible.
I mean, I also grew up loving and watching so much film, but I don't think I really thought it was a viable option, or it never really felt accessible to me for a long time. I mean, I did make a few documentaries in college about my friend's band. First one being The Rhythm Is Gonna Get You. So, but like for years, just worked in the news business as an editor and would try to pitch stories, and no one would take me seriously at the news station. And I finally was like, I'm just going to go out and make something. Like, I think that for me, I mean, it was hitting a breaking point of feeling like I have this desire to tell stories, and I need an outlet to do that. And a lot of times you have to kind of just go do it yourself. So I took like a leave of absence. I took a month off and took a workshop in Mississippi and made my first documentary about a blues musician. And just changed my life, just like woke me up, and I couldn't pursue anything else after that. And then as far as like finding an audience, I mean, it's a really exciting time for short films. There's so many more outlets and online platforms. And so I actually set out very specifically to make a New York Times op doc with this film. And I had to, they won't come on and commission stuff early. Like, I had to go and make the film and then present them with a cut before they would sign on. But it'll be published online in the fall.
Woo. So we have another question.
Hi, thank you for being here and talking to us. I'm Olivia, I'm a UCF film student, and working on my films, I'm just learning how to lead a team as a director, and I just want to know what your styles of leadership are while you're on set, in pre-production, and post, and during shooting.
We should start from the other end this time, just to mix it up.
Yeah.
I need time to think about
Okay.
I know. I actually don't know how to answer that question. I mean, with documentary, it's such a small, scaled-down crew a lot of the time. I mean, I made a feature a few years ago, and it was literally my co-director and I were wearing so many hats, and it was the two of us in the field for 80%. But I think, like, it is such a collaborative art that I think, you know, finding people who you can have dialogue with and converse with and surround yourself with trusted people who share a storytelling sensibility is the best way to approach a subject. And, you know, I think certain leadership skills emerge if you have that great dynamic, if that's a good answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I was the crew for this one, so it was easy to direct myself. But in other situations, I think defined roles and clear, consistent direction, letting people know what your expectations are, keeping an open dialogue, but also letting people know that you may not always agree with them, but it's not out of disrespect. It's just out of the need to execute what you think is best, and prepare them that hopefully they won't be offended by that.
I enjoyed working for other people first to learn set dichotomies and hierarchies. I came up as an AC. I worked as a first AC for 4 years before I started shooting, and that kind of makes you respect the process that a crew goes through and how they care about your film, but in different ways. And so you also learn to respect what everyone's bringing, and maybe that's not just manifested in literally the image, but how the image is able to even be alive. How is that camera running right now? And that's, I think, a really important part, is to understand that there are so many people behind those beautiful shots. There's 30 sweaty people who deeply care about your film, and they may show it in different ways. But also, especially as a woman, I do like to toe the line of not asking for too much. What do you think on set? I do like to have a clear idea, because you do not want it to turn into this. It's just kind of running a ship or something. You do want to have that hierarchy of command. Coming from experience as an AC, when you would feel a director's weak guidance or a DP's lack of being the head of crew and advocating for crew when they should have 6-hour break, meal penalties, etc. It's really important. It is a responsibility. And the best way to learn about it is just to work for other people, and work for other people both in an office, wrapping out a film, and also on set. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, where it's a balance, right? Because it's and kind of what you were saying earlier, I started as an actor myself. I've been acting since I was a little kid. And so when it comes to like approaching actors and working with actors, I've always loved doing that. And I like acting myself, so I try to put myself in my films as well. But I think that it was fun on this movie because everybody was like just constantly doing bits, right? Like in between takes, just because everybody's friends and they're all comedians and they're all very funny people. So it's like you want to foster that to a certain degree because you want the set to be like a fun environment, and you know everybody's getting paid very little or not at all, and everybody's there because they love it. So you want it to be fun, but then like there are some times where you just have to be like, all right, guys, shut the fuck up. Like seriously, we got to do a take, you know. Yeah. So it's like kind of writing that a little bit, and it's and I think and that's something that every film that I've done so far, it's been like, it's always like in the last like 4 or 5 days, I feel like we finally get like the flow down of exactly how everything goes, you know, and kind of the best way to get everything done. And so it's kind of just, yeah, it's a learning process as you're doing it. But I think the more you hash out all that stuff beforehand and you make those very clearly defined roles, and you're like, you know, like working with my brother, Justin, on shooting, it was just, we had a language set up already, so we could kind of bypass some of that stuff when you're there. And I think another huge thing is just being open to, you know, you want to run a tight ship, but then at the same time, like, if someone, you know, in the grip department or your DP or whoever is like, hey, this is just not going to work, and this is a way better idea, you know, it's being open to being like, okay, like letting go a little bit and being like, yeah, you're totally right, and just letting that collaboration flow through a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything that everyone has said. Just being like, it's like you want to be flexible because there are so many people in like indie or like films that are, you know, maybe not, don't have like studio behind it or whatever. You know, just coming from the ground up can be really difficult, so you got to have a little bit resilience, but also know that there's, you know, just if people are on your ship, they probably want to be on that ship, and it's going to be a pain in the ass. I told myself I wouldn't do a metaphor, but is that a metaphor? Oh my God, thank you. I'm getting sidetracked. No, it's just like you just have faith in your thing. It's going to be, it's just really hard to make a film, and you don't want to have an awful time making it. So, yeah.
Any more than is necessary in making a movie. Yeah.
It's already inherently masochistic to decide to make a movie. Yeah, I agree with mostly everything. I was asked once to write a short piece about how to make a movie. It was like a top 10 things. And I remember thinking about that and thinking, oh yeah, what's the most important thing? Even before the screenplay, I said the first most important thing is know who you want to work with and make it people that you trust, because it's such a hard, there are going to be a lot of times when there's a lot of egos involved, and you know, I'm going to echo again what everyone's saying, where define your roles in advance. I mean, contracts are good because I feel like contracts are you know, they're supposed to be what you use to sort of enforce something, but I think more importantly, a contract is a way to force the two of you to talk to each other about what your working relationship is going to be before you start. Because you don't ever really want to sue anybody or ever want to use that contract for anything. I think it's more useful as a tool for negotiation in advance of, like, you know, money aside, like what is this working relationship going to look like? So I think it's always good to just sit down and have that conversation in advance. Wasn't that Gilbert and Sullivan had a real famous interview that they did with somebody where he sits down and the interview asks, well, what comes first, the book or the music? And they both look at each other and laugh and say, the contract. Because, you know, you gotta know what you're getting into together. I think if you have people that you respect who are sort of on the indie film scene, who are up and coming people who maybe have a couple films under their belt, you know, try to find one person who's a little more experienced than you to be on your team. because that'll help a lot too. When you have someone on the inside of your production who can answer quick questions for you, who has the patience to maybe, work with you guys because they really believe in your project, I think that can be a really huge asset on your set. I know Ben Kasulki has got lots and lots of experience, my DP. I mean, he's shot over 50 movies, I think. So having him on set was always super helpful because we had largely an entire, I think all of our crew, except for my co-producer and I and Ben, it was their first feature film they'd ever worked on. They were all fresh out of school. So, we had our core group of 3 people who had done films together, but we loved all these guys, and they were all really awesome, and they all had friends too. Like if we needed an extra hand, like they called up another friend who had just graduated. So it was a unique set. In this case, I didn't know everybody, but I trusted one person who knew like 6 people who were interested in working on the movie, and she was right. They were all reliable, cool people. But yeah, having Ben's energy on set is great because also the humor part is crucial. Like he's a really funny man, but he knows, when to turn it off too because he's very professional. But whenever there was just a tiny space for a joke, you could guarantee he would be cracking it, just to keep everything loose.
Awesome, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this might be, we're approaching almost out of time. So if anybody has
When
any
are we done? 12:30?
Yeah, 15 minutes left.
Yeah, 15 minutes of
TikTok.
Hi guys, how you doing? I have 2 questions. The first one is for the movies about your own story. How do you go about looking at your own story and trying to detach yourself from the story and improve it? Because I know it's kind of hard, you're trying to tell every detail of your own story, but you kind of don't want it to be too much about yourself. And the second story is for the Mole Man movie. How do you go about picking someone else's story and manipulate it in a way without stepping on that person's toes and make them unhappy with the story?
What was the second question?
It's for the Mole Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead. We started down here last time.
Okay.
So how do you put yourself in your movie without putting all of yourself in your movie and playing the balance?
Right. That's a good question. I think it becomes clear. Having trusted friends read your script or look at your film. Like when we shot Cold November, the assembly cut was 2.5 hours long. And I think by the time we got to screen, maybe it wasn't as big of a deal. I think having trusted friends look at your work and help you hone in on what the story is, I think you'll just naturally find that place. And maybe it's less about, how much of yourself not to put in the movie and more about what's important to get the story told. Because there at times can be some really cool things that you could shoot, but it'll be completely, pointless to put it in the movie if the audience doesn't feel like they're it's driving the story forward or being compelling in a way that will support the story that's trying to be told, I guess. Yeah.
I guess I have trouble with, I think sometimes putting too much of my own personal self into something and then realizing like, holy shit, I did a little bit too much. But with this, it's I don't know. A lot of moments in the things that I've written are all a lot of it is truth. A lot of it is an exaggerated version of that truth. It's a balance. Definitely like finding like you can have like all these like things that happened, but like what's the most like important thing? Like you gotta choose. Like there's all these 5 different kind of like goofy things I want to put in that are like personal to me and fit within the movie, but I should probably just put one and not like just jam pack this film full of my memories. So it is a balance, but it's I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're doing great. I think I almost would posit that, for me personally anyway, I think it's like if you're writing a story and you've got, like it's your film, like especially like if you like write and direct a film, that wasn't really the case here, but I think it's almost kind of impossible to like put too much of yourself in it. I think it's like, I think for me anyway, whenever I write something and try to film it, I'm always kind of basing it off personal life experiences, and just because that's not where I tend to source stories from, is kind of from the remarkable and spectacular that's outside of myself. It's oftentimes it's about someone who's very close to me in my life or something like that. And I think all films to a degree are just kind of like they're kind of like a prism, of whatever, the filmmaker, and it's, it's collaborative. It's not just one perspective, but it's like, I think it really does come just from personal places, and I think that, I don't know, I've just always been of the opinion to just do that as much as possible, just because that's all I really know. And I think, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's when you kind of start pulling back, I think, a little bit. But yeah, I think it's all so subjective in the first place that I've never tried to be like, oh, okay, I think here maybe try to make something that's a little bit more palatable or like understandable to everybody else, just because I don't know what anybody else is thinking. I only really know like how I think, really. So when I'm approaching story, I just try to dive head. I don't know if this made sense, but yeah, I think that makes sense.
I was going to say, like, invariably, every single film is a reflection of your own neurosis.
Yeah.
And like, either like your personal trauma, cultural trauma, and like whatever you're finding as like critical elements in your characters are somehow related to what you would find to be a critical element. So to like, very like Zizek or Lynchian to say that, but I just feel like every single person finds interest in compelling problems in their films based on their own issues. But as far as like literal adaptation, I think the best advice is like, sometimes my first short was very much like based upon like more literally a three act on kind of a community that I grew up in. Sometimes remembering that you're not just an outsider looking in, like the more you embrace your particularities, the more it's gonna be an interesting film. Like, don't be an outsider. Embrace the fact that you have such personal memories there, because that's going to be the most interesting story you can tell.
Yeah. The things you think are the least interesting usually end up being the most, in my experience. Yeah. Like, oh, nobody would care about that. Actually, they would, because you care about it so little, because it's so familiar to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the gun tied up on the treehouse.
Yeah.
Like untying that gun that was hanging there.
Yeah.
It's a tiny detail that's totally interesting.
Right.
But if you grew up in Minnesota, you just
so
feel like,
monotonous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like what everybody does. Why would you put that in a movie?
Right.
But the relationship in a documentary, in a feature with the subjects, I think is like probably 70 to 75% of the film. You can be an amazing filmmaker, and if you have a bad relationship with your subjects, they're going to be guarded. It's going to reflect itself on screen. You want people to feel as comfortable as possible. And then on the other side of that, when I'm in the edit, I'm constantly thinking about what the family's going to see when they see this, because ultimately I want their story to be told in a way that they like. It's got to be truthful, because if I'm editorializing, they're not going to like it, and I think that's kind of a failure. Something that I learned by making mistakes was early on was that when you're trying to get someone to be honest, or I guess you never have to be combative in an interview when you're a filmmaker. You can just let people tell you the story, and then when it gets into the edit, it will, if you're telling two opposite sides of a story, it's going to reveal itself. Like, you don't have to get people to say controversial things. They just, their viewpoint will be the counterpoint to what someone else is saying in the film. And I made that mistake on another project, and it sucked because of it. So I kind of forget where I was going with that, but it all goes back to patience and just having to tell the true story. If someone says something that you didn't think they were going to say, don't let it get you flustered or out of sorts. Like, you just have to work with that. If you get a different answer from what you were expecting, that's just the way your film's headed now. So, yeah, patience, learning to keep your mouth shut during an interview and just let people talk. I think that's something that Errol Morris said that I took to heart, is just like, not talking, people will just suddenly spill everything that you wanted to hear. You know, when you finish asking questions at like 3 minutes after they think the interview is done, a lot of times is when they will be the most honest with you. So, not my advice, someone else's advice that I'm just regurgitating right now.
I will say, though, that documentary is still very subjective. That kind of storytelling takes shape in the edit room, and like we have a tremendous amount of power over how a subject or a character or person or story is being told. And I think that's why, you know, you talked about the filmmaker-subject relationship. I mean, when there's like a good chemistry there, like that's very palpable on screen. And I think like trying to faithfully represent that, recreate that in the edit room is like as close as you can get to, you know, being objective if that's your goal, but that's not necessarily, like there's kind of a way that your own personal point of view is injected into the subject that you might not even realize till later, like after it's done, or years later, or who knows. But I will say, I think what's exciting about this film, and one of the reasons why I wanted to make it, is because there's so much room for interpretation in an observational film, and like everyone will bring their own experience and walk away having a very different experience. And I thought that was really exciting about this project.
And going back to that, I think it's easy editorially to like make Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, you know, music cues and like how you paint the picture of a person, but it's not interesting when you have a clear villain and a clear good guy, right? When we start to blur those lines, that's when discussion starts after the film. Well, this person was right, that person was right. Like when those waters get muddy, is when you actually have an interesting dialogue. And I think that's like, everyone would love people to be talking about their film at coffee afterwards, right?
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking. So it looks like we're done with audience questions. We have just 5 more minutes, and I wanted to ask one last thing, because I know there's a lot of film students from Full Sail and UCF and probably Valencia here. Is there one piece of advice, one thing that you wish you could go back and tell yourself before you started shooting the movie?
Before I started shooting?
Yeah. We don't have to go in order this time. If anybody's got one, just go ahead. See, I stumped them. I waited for the hard question for the end.
It's not going to be easy.
It's not going to be easy. That's what you would tell yourself?
Yeah, it's going to be harder than you think. Yeah.
How much footage did you shoot from Old Man?
I shot over 3 years, so I don't know, 300-400 hours. I have no idea. I don't know. There's like, I could tell you there's probably about 80 gigs of footage, I think. Is that right? No, maybe more than, maybe like 800.
Yeah.
8 terabytes. There we go. 8 terabytes.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you mean 80 terabytes?
He was shooting in 480, so it's fine.
Yeah. It was only 1080, not 4K. So, yeah.
I guess for me it would just be like, don't freak out too much. Like the week we started shooting, like the week that Donald Trump was elected president, and that was just like really weird. Like it was
We
like
shot in East Texas.
yeah, we shot in like Trumpstown, USA. Like it was really insane, and so I think it was like we kind of didn't know before we were going into it, like. I don't know, just the whole world felt weird, you know,
Yeah.
like everybody was freaked out whenever that happened. And so I think, I don't know, I think it would have just been like, hey, it's going to be okay. It's not, you know, the world is still turning fine, you know what I mean? And like everybody here, you know, supports you, even like the people, you know, it was just like going to that part of the country, like, and shooting in those kinds of towns, like right after that was a bit of a trip, especially coming from Austin, which is kind of this liberal, you know, oasis in Texas. And yeah, so I think it would just be like, hey, you know, relax. It's going to be fine. Everybody supports you for the most part, you know, and yeah, just keep your head. Yeah.
If you don't have anything to say to yourself, that's fine.
I've been struggling.
Yeah?
Yeah, I don't know.
Me too.
I think it was a pretty smooth shoot. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I have advice I would give to myself 5 years ago, probably.
to get a finance degree instead of making movies.
Yeah. Well, whenever filmmakers ask for advice, my first piece is always don't do it. Don't do it unless you're prepared for a life of poverty and to be struggling all the time.
That seems like a great place to stop.
Or get a spouse with a really good job.
Right. Or have this is a good piece of advice. Have something else that you can do, or just figure out a way. You have to be a good business person in some way, shape, or form, because you need to always be hustling to figure out how to support your addiction of making movies. I mean, hopefully at a certain point it won't be as hard, but even when it's not as hard, it's still hard. It's just hard in different ways. So you just got to be prepared to suffer.
Maybe learning Excel is a good thing too.
Yeah.
Spreadsheets and stuff.
Google Sheets.
Yeah.
Take a laxative, every once in a while.
Eat a lot of fiber.
IBS is real,
They should have liberal arts degree should require you to learn Excel.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
to skip that while my business class friends were doing it. That
I
was
feel like
helpful.
liberal arts degrees, they should require you to get like a bartending license.
Yeah.
So that you
Totally.
could always employ yourself at least.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you guys for coming.
Oh.
And let's have a round of applause for our filmmakers.